Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 19 of All About African Violets. I think you can see that I have guests with me today. We kind of have a whole different look here in the sunroom. I have my friends Joyce and Kent Stork with me. Thank you for joining me on the podcast, you guys.
Happy to be here.
We have had a really phenomenal day, you guys. It's really been a wonderful day. Joyce and Kent have been here. They came in last night from Nebraska, and today was this is Saturday. It's Saturday night, and it was the Illinois African Violet Society's fall get together, and we had a really wonderful time. Joyce and Kent were our speakers, and we had a great location. And we really had a fun day. A lot of people came to the event. We are all exhausted, and we've all had a glass of wine and a really wonderful dinner, and a great dessert. And now we're here.
We're all cleaned up and ready to go.
We did have to kind of get cleaned up. If you see any spots on us, it's because we ate a dessert that had powdered sugar on it, and it was like a snowstorm in here. It really was unbelievable. But before we really jump into everything, I would first like to say, and probably you guys want to say this too, that my heart and my thoughts and my prayers are with everyone on the East Coast of the United States who have been affected or had their lives demolished by Hurricane Sandy. It was just an unbelievable superstorm, and I'm so sorry for anyone who has been affected by it. It just, from what I could see and what we could see on the news here, it truly was unbelievable. So I'm keeping you all in my thoughts and my prayers. And I would, pardon me, it's that dessert.
You want us to talk for a while?
I have a glass of water right here. Oh my goodness. Guys, we're going to do this a little differently this week, obviously, because it's rare that I have a guest with me on the podcast, two guests who are true experts in the world of African violets and other Gesneriads. And I'm really excited that you guys are here. I did have a couple of questions, though, on the website this week and that were asked. And so I wrote my answers down, and you can tell me what you think, because I'm always happy for you to tell me the right thing if I think the wrong thing. So guys, we're going to jump right into tips and treasures. And Daniel left a great post on Facebook about acquiring plants from a grower with a similar climate. He'd heard what you and I had talked about, Kent, when we talked at Missouri Valley. Mm-hmm. And he said that he got some from a grower with a similar climate to his. And I thought that was great. I think that's very great. And I just wanted to say also that I think if a plant was hybridized by someone in a similar climate to yours, that also is really helpful.
Yes.
And we talked about that before.
And I think it's especially important if you like variegated varieties,
Mm-hmm.
because variegation is so sensitive to temperature.
Mm-hmm.
And so buying a variegated plant that was hybridized to grow in the same region that you live in is going to give you a lot better chance at success with the variegates.
Okay, cool. Well, Daniel also he mentioned that he said he picked up a Rob's Antique Rose, one that I'm also very fond of, and he said that he's finding it to be a really good plant for him, that it cleaned up the best of all the plants that he bought, and is starting to have great form. And Daniel, I think you have hit on another great truth, much as I forget now who asked me about a plant that didn't shape up. Mm-hmm. And that's a great truth, that sometimes they don't all shape up for show.
Don't.
They just don't. And in my experience, Antique Rose is one that does. It kind of grows itself for me. And I wrote this down so that I wouldn't forget to say this the right way. That I said, much the same way that some plants just never shape up for show, there are others that will often just grow themselves. And that is one of the things that I look for in show plant when I look at the foliage.
Absolutely.
I mean, we talked about this too, about knowing that, looking at the leaves, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, that people have asked, well, what do you look for a show plant? And the foliage is always one of the first things.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I really look for in my hybridizing is I want the plant to shape up and to grow nicely without a lot of effort.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many varieties on the market that I say, why fuss around with the ones that cause you problems all the time?
I sometimes I say this a lot on the podcast. It's either going to make it or it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to grow or it's not. And if it doesn't grow well in my conditions, I agree that I'm not going to waste a whole lot of shelf space on it unless it has tremendous sentimental value.
Good or really redeeming values.
Yeah.
There are some of those that have really spectacular blossoms or markings on the blossoms and that just make you happy to see the blossoms on the shelf.
Mm-hmm. Or if you're a designer, give you
yes.
lots of energy just looking at that flower, and you want to put it into a design, and the fact that it shapes up or doesn't is sort of beside the point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, and Daniel, he was the question guy. Daniel left all these questions. It was just great. He said that he also found that the minis and semis that he got are suckering a lot. And I know that in my own experience, I find that the little ones sucker usually more often than a big plant. What are your thoughts on that? Not so much?
Yeah, probably. I don't grow that many minis and semi-minis.
I've been growing more recently. I'm
and
more
with
of
the
a standard
problems that I
grower.
had lately, I had hardly any of the
Okay.
little ones that survived. But
I do think, though, that there are some of the minis and semi-minis which hybridizers may have considered registering them as trailers and decided that they could be grown a single crown, but that they by nature want to sucker a little bit. They have that little bit of a trailing nature.
well, and I think that was something that was really more common in some of the early hybridizing
Yes.
for minis and semi-minis.
Yeah, I
That
think
they
that's
have
true.
that the trailing species background in them.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where some of the problems started. And those things keep passing down through the generations.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think some of the more recent hybrids are less likely
Okay.
See that.
to sucker.
Well, I have a theory, and I want to know what you guys think about my theory. Because I think sometimes plants sucker. I think a plant's mission is to replicate itself. And it does that by blooming so that it sets seed,
Mhm.
or by suckering so
Right.
that the plant goes on. And when we disbud for show over a period of time,
Absolutely.
I think
it
that
stresses
sometimes,
the plant.
yeah.
Well, and actually, though, that both those, there are two different modes that a plant will operate in. It'll operate in the reproductive mode or in the vegetative mode.
Hold that thought. Remember, you guys, how I told you that I just kind of do it because it feels like this is the right thing I should be doing, and that my friend Joyce is the scientific one? Please continue.
Okay, well, when they're in the vegetative mode, they're growing leaves and growing very happily. They'll often stay vegetative if they feel no threat. If you put a violet in too big a pot, it'll normally go vegetative. It has no reason to bloom. It's got plenty of room for the roots. It's happy. But when you give it a little threat by putting it in a small pot or by disbudding it for show, you're threatening the plant. You're giving it a reason to fear, and that naturally puts it into the survival of the species attitude, which is a reproductive mode. Any kind of disturbance, even tamping the pot hard on a countertop, is enough upset to the plant to make it start thinking, like a plant would think, of being reproductive and making flowers or suckering. And absolutely for sure, when you are disbudding for show, if that plant can't bloom, it's going to sucker. And on Petrocosmias, which are my other favorite Gesneria, sometimes you can't tell the difference between the bloom or a sucker because they both come from the same place and they're both part of that reproductive mode.
Okay. Well, further to this same thing, I know that in the garden, if you grow mums or pansies or whatever you might grow outside, my grandma and my mom, both of whom were great gardeners, outdoor gardeners, always said you had to deadhead those blossoms. You had to cut them off because particularly with the pansies, my grandma said, if you let the pansies go to seed, they're not going to bloom again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you find, because you do a lot of work when you hybridize, Kent, with seed pods, once you let a plant go to seed, do you find, does it ever, after that, will it bloom again?
Yes,
It will bloom
it does.
again. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I, in fact, right now have seed pods ripening back at the shop,
That's
and
exciting.
the plant has come into bloom again.
Okay.
But I think it's a good thing. In order to get seed pods with seed that's going to be viable, you really need to have those seed pods stay healthy on the plant. I find usually at least 3 months, and if you can get to 4 months, you're going to have better germination in the seeds.
Okay.
And fortunately, these are about 4 months.
Great.
So I have high hopes.
You have work to do when you get home.
Yeah. But you have to keep the plant healthy through that entire time, because if you get mildew or any kind of fungus type thing, the seed pods abort.
Okay.
And if you start having some kind of problems and you treat with some kind of chemical, that will often get the seed pods to abort. So you're keeping the plant really healthy.
Okay.
And when the plant's really healthy, it's going to want to bloom.
Mm-hmm.
So I do find that over time, when I have made crosses and had seed pods that have ripened on plants, generally there are more flowers
That's good
that
to
are
know.
coming along. Sometimes
That's good
I remove some of them so that the seed pods don't actually get lost among the flowers.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Just,
Well, cool. Thank you. Thank you both. Well, because I've often thought, that I wondered about that, because I know that, like, I've got mums out in the yard now, and I had to deadhead them so that they would bloom again. And I thought, I wonder.
well, and if you
Vines,
haven't done it, you have no way
Yeah,
of,
I
you
mean, no.
don't have any
Yeah.
reference.
Yes, I've never had a seed pod. I never had a seed pod.
Well, and even
before.
at that, then the other thing is that every time you deadhead and you cut plant tissue, so that you're going to get a release of ethylene gas from the plant, which is a plant's way of signaling to other plants that there's a predator afoot, and it doesn't really know the difference between you and a grasshopper.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever it is that's causing this damage to it is a very unnatural thing, and the signal, the ethylene gas, actually tells not only the rest of the plant, but the plants that are in the immediate area, that there's a threat.
Mm-hmm.
And they step up photosynthesis. And so photosynthesis increases about 15%, so the plant becomes more efficient growing. And so normally those people that are grooming their plants are always going to look sturdier and stronger. And a lot of that is because that ethylene gas effect is
When you're
going
pulling
on.
old leaves
And
up.
it's not just affecting the plant that you're cleaning up, it's affecting the plant that's across on the other side of the room.
That far?
Mhm.
Not just on the same shelf?
Yeah, it's just any plant that can sense that presence of extra ethylene gas is going to react with upping its photosynthesis and becoming more efficient.
You guys have to come
Well,
and visit me
and,
more
you know,
often. This
and-
is great.
This is not something, I mean, it sounds like, ooh, you're making something up, but Joyce actually discussed this with someone who had studied it, who was working on
He ultimately
degree
he was
in
from
school.
Minnesota. He ultimately became a plumber because he made more money.
Oh.
But his master's or doctoral thesis was written on this study of how much increase in photosynthesis came in African violets from this release of ethylene gas. So yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and remember, I mentioned this to you. There's a woman named Diane. Hi, Diane. She watches the podcast. She's on Ravelry, and she is growing her plants in a very dry part of the country and is using domes, and wanted to experiment when my show plants were. I was hoping they were going to bloom, and I talked about what you shared about the ethylene gas. And she said, well, what if you put a banana there on the shelf? And so she did a little bit of experimenting with a banana and knew that she could only leave it in there for a few days. And she felt that she got some good results from that. You know, like made a little break in the banana, and it went really well.
Yeah.
And bananas are cheap.
I know, and tasty. And you can eat it.
And you can eat them. You don't have to put powdered sugar on it.
Guys, we were covered with powdered sugar. We almost sat down covered with powdered sugar. I thought you guys might get a laugh out of that. But one of the other reasons I really wanted to have Kent and Joyce here is one of the topics they discussed today at Illinois. It talked about pests and all kinds of stuff, and there is a virus that has kind of been talked about in a lot of different areas, and it's the INSV virus. And Joyce, who's the more scientific one, will give you the whole big long name. And I just asked if she and Kent would talk a little bit about the virus. I think that there are some misconceptions about it, and that there's not as much information about it, and it seems very frightening. I think when we don't know about something and we don't understand it, it's always more frightening. And they have agreed to just kind of give us, a little overview and talk a little bit about it. So
Okay.
I'm going to be quiet now.
Let's
let you talk.
Let's say, first of all, thankfully, we've had all kinds of problems with pests and stuff through the years, but INSV, we're talking about because we've done research on it. We're
That's
not
right.
talking from
Right.
personal experience.
Right.
Which is always a little bit of a challenge, but INSV, which stands for impatiens necrotic spot topovirus, or just normally virus, that's what it stands for. It's a topovirus, very similar to the tomato viruses, and it maybe even evolved from that was really found in impatient plants, which are grown out in the gardens. And because of thrips, they got carried in and have infested a number of greenhouse plants. Among them, African violets may be infected by it. But it's a disease that's very difficult because it infects one part of the plant, but doesn't necessarily reach the rest of the plant immediately. And there are a lot of different symptoms. In fact, I brought a book. You always see nice books here, and this one is one of my favorite books. It's a very scientific book, but it's a compendium of plant diseases. And African violets are treated a lot in the book, and it's fun because you can see a lot of color pictures of diseased plants, which is helpful sometimes when you're trying to figure out what it is that you've got going on wrong.
These are gross.
They are.
Yes, they
are
are.
kind of gross.
They are.
They are kind of gross. But this book lists the symptoms that you can have in INSV in your plants. So it said that you might have stunting, which means that the center's not growing, necrotic spotting, which means dead spots, chlorotic spotting, which means lighter green spots. You might get areas of black or brown stem necrosis, which always means death, ring spots, mosaic patterns, line patterns, and vein necrosis, which means the veins of the plant collapse. And the plants that are the young are the ones that are young are the ones most likely to be really seriously affected. So if you had a mature plant that was affected, you might see almost no symptoms. If a little plant is affected, you're going to see a lot of the worst kinds of symptoms.
So how does a plant become infected with something like this?
Well, it takes a vector, which is another scientific term, but it takes a fluid-to-fluid contact. So the most common vector is an insect called thrips, which is the bane of a lot of blooming plant collections.
Well, they're in
including violets.
they're in everything outdoors. I mean,
Yeah.
thrips are so common.
Very common everywhere in North America. And thrips feed with a rasping sort of feeder that scrapes, almost like an ice scraper.
Yeah,
And
they don't have, unlike some other insects,
they don't have teeth.
Yeah, they don't have. They can't just suck the juices out of the plant. What they do, they scrape, on the blossoms or on foliage. They actually use a mouth part that scrapes it, and then that causes the plant to ooze a little bit, and then they're lapping up the juice,
Yeah.
so to speak. But meanwhile,
Ew.
they're spitting.
They also spit.
Yeah.
So they suck and they spit all at the same time. You would not invite them to
Ew.
dinner.
Ew.
But in the process of doing that, if you've got a thrips that has been out on impatiens and picked up a virus from infected impatiens plants, and then flew into your collection and then started feeding on your violets, and through the sucking and spitting is doing a really good transfer of fluids. And so you're getting fluid to fluid contact, and that part of your violet would become infected with this disease.
And then if they move on to another plant, or if they're on a plant that's a violet that's got the virus in it, then sucking, spitting, all that, and they move to another plant, then they can
They just
move
keep
it over
on
to the
passing
next
along.
plant. It's if you don't have the problem with thrips, you could have two violets sitting next to each other, one with the virus and one without, and the one without it is not going to catch the virus.
Yeah,
Okay.
it won't just catch it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there another vector? I mean,
Yes.
is there only one? I mean, is
The
that
other vector that is most likely to be the problem is the grower. Using
oh
like
great.
using a knife and taking a leaf and trimming a leaf and putting it down of a sick plant, and then going right to another leaf and trimming it and putting it down that was a healthy plant, and put it down. All of those plantlets that come up are going to be infected with the INSV.
Okay, and before everybody runs screaming from the room, because it sounds like it's the most horrible thing in the world, how is it as common? It's not particularly common. I mean, there's been more
No.
chatting and talking about it in the more last year or so.
I think that the fear of it is because there isn't a cure for a virus. So if you have the virus, you have to throw the plant away. And there's a certain kind of attitude of, ew, if I have it somewhere, I just want to get rid of everything and start over and know that I have clean plants. And so it's that fear that you're going to have a complete wipeout and have to start over.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah.
Not because of that, but
Yeah.
you know.
So, it is one of those, it's a real death knell when you get it, and people really do find themselves, the only solution is just to clean out and throw away.
So, what should people maybe be doing? Is there anything we should be doing as growers that to try to avoid it?
I think the first thing is to buy plants, first of all, from really reputable vendors. One of the reasons to be an AVSA vendor is because AVSA clearly has some clout over a vendor who didn't take care of their customers properly. And so you've got some protection. It's one of the big spreads of INSV has been the fact that there's just such a dissemination of plants between people these days. And the internet has certainly speeded that up. And not everybody is sending with a good conscience. And INSV is hard to know that you have it sometimes. So first of all, buy from a vendor who would actually call you up afterwards and say, and there are some vendors out there right now who are struggling with INSV or think they might have it, that have literally called their people that bought from them and said, listen, I'm concerned, I had a positive test, I'm checking into it, watch your plants that you got from me. And that's something that will help anybody a lot.
So, always prudent to isolate anything, you
Absolutely.
got to do that. Is this something that people really need to worry about? I mean, I think I wanted you to talk about it because I keep hearing about it, and I know that there are people everywhere that are hearing about it, and just to kind of dispel some of the.
If you had any suspicion that you had INSV, and you have had a major outbreak of almost uncontrollable thrips, where you really had spilled pollen everywhere and you knew the thrips were really rampant and you were struggling to get them under control, yeah.
Then you have something to worry
Then
about.
you have something to be seriously concerned about.
Okay.
And it would be worth it at that point to maybe order one of the INSV,
It's hard.
Impatiens necrotic spot,
INSV.
INSV.
It's been a long
Kits.
day, you guys.
It has, and we had that glass of
I
wine.
know.
So, but there are a couple of different tests that they can do for INSV.
There's one that you can do. You can test your own plants, and
You can order a kit for about $5
Yeah.
through the mail and do your own test.
however, this particular test is known to throw false positives.
Okay.
So it is not definitive.
If you
It
got a
m-
false positive there, you probably should go to the next step and take the more serious test.
And that would be like
Your
contacting the
extension
horticulture
or-
department at a
okay.
university
Okay.
or your extension agent, and then sending stuff in to test, because it's a more thorough test, it's a more exacting test that they do, and it's more reliable information than
Okay.
the little self-test things that
And-
you can do.
Are so really looking for plants that just don't look well.
You know, I have a friend in South Dakota who had a great problem with INSV several years ago, and he has told me that the real telltale symptom is when you get the bullseye markings on the foliage,
the ring spot.
where you
kind
get a
of.
ring spot, and it's kind of lighter around the outside and a dark green circle in the middle
Okay.
of it. And he said that to him was the real telltale thing,
Okay.
that the INSV was present.
Although when another greenhouse in South Carolina struggled, she found that she just generally had a lack of vigor across all of her plants. They wouldn't die, but they weren't happy. And
It's not easy.
No.
I mean, it's not.
You could- yeah, it
It's
seems
not like you
it-
can look at the plant and say, "Oh yes,
That's
that
it.
has it."
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to have that good testing done to know for sure.
Okay. So, is that something that you think would recommend if somebody wanted, or would you suggest that if something just doesn't look right, to toss it out, or? I mean,
Well-
is it financially? I mean, if you had a lot of plants, do you have to test every one of them?
I would say if you had a collection of 100 plants or more, and you started having consistently a problem you really couldn't explain by
Okay.
insects or fungus disease, that it might be worth it to get the home testing kit and
Okay.
try INSV, especially if you had any reason to suspect that you might have, especially if you had those thrips.
Okay.
And then, other than that, if you've got less than 100 plants, then if you've got a plant that's not growing well, throw it out.
When in doubt, throw
Well,
it out.
And I have always said my favorite tool to use when growing African violets is a garbage can. Unless it's a plant that has sentimental value of some kind, if a plant is sick, it's so much easier to throw it out and enjoy the ones that are healthy.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I mean, that's, I think, part of limiting your collection, which we all
Yeah.
talk about all the time, is if it, when you really are in doubt. Earlier for me this year for me, I should say, I thought they're not okay. It's not the virus. I just knew that, with the micronutrient craziness that was going on, that nothing was going to grow. They weren't okay.
Yeah.
Well, sounds kind of scary, but I think that we can, if we're vigilant, we kind of we're careful, isolate anything new that comes in. And something else that you mentioned to me is to, if you want to, or it could be helpful, to make sure your tools are clean.
Yes,
Soapy water or a bleach water solution.
or even alcohol.
Okay. And in between cutting a plant, do you then
Yeah, anytime you would use a tool to, scrape open whether you're poking suckers out or cutting leaves,
And
wash it in
Fizan is
between.
great for that because that is
Fizan
something
would
that
work
is
too.
used for disinfecting surfaces.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. I will put some info in the show notes about Vicen, you guys, so you can find it if that's something you feel you need. Okay. Well, this has been very interesting, and I really appreciate you guys spending a little time talking about that.
But your opening tips and treasures has lasted much longer than it normally does.
Well, you guys are a treasure. I'm really glad to have you here.
You're such a treasure.
I know. Well, and so Tips and Treasures has been pretty long, so it's time for a look at what's on the
At the
stands.
stands.
So if you guys want to hang on, either I'll be back or we'll all be back, and we'll see you on the other side. Here we are in the sunroom, you guys. We just woke the plants up. They were already sleeping. So we turned the lights on, and everything's looking kind of good. Here's Joyce kind of pruning a few things off my Ascananthus, which
It looks better now.
yeah, it already looks better. Here's my Metrocosmia carrii. I've been a little nervous about it, but Joyce says it looks really good, and she is a well-known expert in Petrocosmia, so we're
Yeah,
crossing my fingers.
It's got a few necrotic spots.
That
Right
does
there.
not mean that it has anything wrong with it, you
No.
guys.
It just means that probably while it was packed in the paper, that it just got pressed and
Yeah,
it's
it's
just
got a
it's
little here,
delicate.
too.
Yeah. And so it's just that's what a necrotic spot is. It's just a little dead spot, but it's really typical that you get a little bruise like that and just the tissue just breaks
Okay.
down.
There's my little Apicia. It's going to go in a dome later this week. And this is Roulette. This is the plant I mentioned to you last week. Had a bud when it arrived. And I hope you can see it. It is a chimera. That's that purple stripe. And it is blooming true. So I will be taking those blossoms off this week and hopefully getting a chance to do some repotting. I'll pot that into my own mix and let it start growing. Let's go take a look in the guest room. Well, guys, just a quick look here in the guest room. These are the same plants that you saw last week, and they're still doing quite well. I took a couple of plants with me, though, to the dog show that we had today. And
You didn't win any prizes.
no, there were worse plants than mine. Joyce is trying to help me here because I always like mess up these domes. Here's a look under the dome here. Whoa, there we go. These are all the plants, the leaves and plantlets from the Box of Joy. And it's just looking really cool. There. And then a quick look down here. Here's Western Moon looking beautiful. Really beautiful. You guys, you saw this
Yes.
at in Tulsa, and I took a whole row of leaves off, and it's this big already.
It's
So
looking happy.
yeah,
Yes,
and it's
very
looking
much
beautiful. It's ready to be potted on. And here are two of the other ones that went to Tulsa. Let's go down to the basement. Guys, these are the Smithiantha plants, and Joyce is going to take a couple of them home with her. And they seem to be growing. They are sprouting. Nothing. I'm not seeing that really deep cinnamon color. This one is
It's
probably
starting.
close. It's starting.
When you see it from the side, can you see it there?
Yeah, that leaf.
Yeah.
They're starting looking like they're going to be okay. But these are the Smithiantha plants that I got, and now we'll go look at the big stand. Look at the trailers. They look really good. Sushi is blooming true. I did check it out. Kent just yawned really loud, you guys. And this is Ramblin' Sunshine over here. It's looking great. And then
You show them the wonky flowers.
well, I thought they were wonky, but you know what? I looked them up, and that's how they bloom. Pick that up a little.
Try. Look
There.
into the camera, girls.
There. They're very beautiful. These are the plantlets that they're growing really well from the first batch that I separated. And I was just moving over to the other one, but there's none there anymore because I moved them. And this dome, there. Guys, I think it's time. I'm going to give you a good long view. Kent just yawned again. This tray has a lot of plantlets for me to be working on in the coming weeks. And now I'm going to step around to the other side and show you the other tray. Here is the last. Joyce just made me laugh. Kent went up the stairs and she said, "You've got powdered sugar on your back." We had powdered sugar dessert. It was really good. I was asked about this beautiful little pink plant that's really growing well. And it's a trailer. I'm going to pull it out so you guys can really see it. Do you remember, this is the one I forgot to put the name on the where it was growing, because I thought, oh, I'll remember what it was, and I thankfully did remember. But this is champagne pink, and I think that it is going to be a stunner. It's starting to green up a little bit more in the center there, and soon I will be able to separate these and let them grow. They're a little too pale. They don't have enough green to make enough chlorophyll to keep going for a while. Oh, Kent went upstairs to get a plant, you
We have a
guys.
guest plant.
A guest plant.
A guest plant.
Oh, it's beautiful. Look at it. Kent, what is it?
It is Nuvolemia oblaka,
All right,
which
so
means elusive cloud. It's a Ukrainian hybrid.
ooh. Well, it's gorgeous. It's visiting on my stand down in the basement.
But it's going home with us again.
Yeah, it's not staying. All right, I'm getting the low battery signal, so I'll be right back. All right, new battery, and I'm upstairs, and here's the big box violet, and it's just beautiful. I say that every week, but it's grown so well, and I really like it. I think everyone should maybe have one of these, huh? It's just a violet from the big box store, one that you don't have to get ready for show, that you just enjoy. Well, that was a pretty good look at what's on the stands. Things are looking good. And how often do you have a guest violet?
Yeah.
So I had special guests and a special guest violet.
And you know what was really fun?
What?
Because I've been watching these plants on the podcast,
Yeah.
and it's like seeing the movie star in person.
Oh, how fun!
Yes. Yes. It's like, oh look, I just saw that on TV.
Well, we did miss two plants. Those are the two that I took to the dog show. That was my plant of Rob's antique rose, and also my plant of Sultan. And I gotta tell you guys, Sultan is not blooming true. So I'm disappointed because it was difficult to grow to begin with, and it didn't look that great, which is why I took it to the dog show. But when I did stop and go and look up the blossom description, it's not blooming true.
And
So
you know what that means?
what does that mean, Kent?
It's time for the garbage can.
No,
It's time to limit
no.
your collection,
or-
unless you're a designer.
It might mean that it's pet quality as opposed to show quality.
Pet quality, I like that.
Have you ever explained what the dog show is?
I don't suppose I have. You guys, a dog show, that's a very good point. A dog show is where, we call it a DAWG, so like dog show. Dog show is where you bring the most terrible plants that you have on your shelf. There's always one that got neglected and looks ridiculous, or has a really long neck, or is growing completely sideways because you forgot to turn it.
Or you're
And-
going to do it someday, and
you just
someday
never
just hasn't come
hasn't
yet.
gotten
Yes.
there. So you take the worst of the worst.
And when you judge them, you pick the worst in class, and then you say it was really a terrible thing that you did, and you give them the award.
It's great.
And we got to judge the classes today,
And
and
you did.
Annie did not have the worst in class
Well,
of
I
any
was kind of
class.
glad about that. But it was an awful lot of fun. But I did take Sultan to the dog show, and he may be pet quality, but I rarely will give shelves, and I have shelf space right now because I'm still rebuilding my collection, but I will rarely give shelf space to something that isn't blooming true.
Well, if it's pet quality, it's got to make up for it in other ways.
Well, see, the big box violet is pet quality, and it's magnificent. There's
It
no
is.
question.
It is.
It's always going to have a home in the conservatory stand for as long as it wants it.
Mm-hmm.
But Sultan is just making me cranky. So
You bought a show, Violet, and it turned out to be a pet.
That's it. Oh my goodness. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that look at what's on the stands, because it's time to get the bail money ready. Woohoo!
Woo.
Well, I don't have a whole lot to share with you this week. One thing I did want to tell you is that I did hear, I believe on Facebook, someone left a note that the Tri-State show that I mentioned to you last week that was in Morristown, New Jersey, has been canceled, and I'm sure that that has to do with Hurricane Sandy. So there is a show coming up on the Mid-Atlantic. The Mobs show, I believe, is still going on in Richmond, Virginia. It's November 8th and 9th, and that's the Mid-Atlantic African Violet Society's 22nd annual convention and show. So there's info about that on the AVSA website on the events page. And there's also, I had to just share this with you guys. If you happen to be in Romania, and perhaps you are, and I will likely pronounce this poorly, so please forgive me. Clubul Roman des Ghezneriae,
Close.
close. It's the Romanian Ghezneri Club. They are having a show in Bucharest, Romania, from November 29th to December 2nd. So if you are traveling in Romania or you live in Romania, there's going to be a show, and that might be well worth seeing.
Yeah.
Violet people anywhere are
Anywhere.
great people.
Yeah.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Well, it's time to keep moving forward. I have so enjoyed having you guys here. I know this is a crazy episode. I hope you guys have enjoyed seeing it. This has been a really amazing week. I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off. Most of my choices going, yep, Annie, you sure were. I was nervous for the event with the Illinois State Society, but it went well, and everyone seemed to have a great time. And I think that that's so important about, one of the things about moving forward is to be able to go, okay, I've done everything I can do, and now I just have to take a breath and keep moving forward, and everything is going to happen how it's supposed to happen. And I'm kind of grateful that the day is done, because it was, I think everyone had a wonderful time.
They did. What you guys don't know is that Annie is just as wonderful a hostess with a group of people as she is on this show, and
Making me blush.
yes, well, but the people that were there today just had a ball, and it was because Annie worked so hard.
Well,
so
thank you.
you should be very proud of that.
Well, it was fun, and I, once it was over, and they were a big help. They helped me move tables. They helped me clean up.
We gave a spectacular talk.
And
Yes,
you gave
we
a
did.
spectacular, two spectacular talks, and just wonderful. It was just wonderful. So I know that the week to come is, you never know what's going to come next around the corner, but I hope that your days are filled with all the things you love. Good growing, and I'll see you next time.